our question that comes to us this time is about a particular piece of scripture we read recently, and I'm going to read it for you and then tell you the question. The scripture is from John chapter 8, verses 6 through 8. This happens when the adulteress is thrown at the feet of Jesus. And it says there, they said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they had kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. So the question that came to us is, not what did Jesus write, but was Jesus taught to write, and did he write anything else? And so we're going to start here. This is what I just read for you, John 8, 6 through 8. Jesus is clearly writing something. It doesn't say he doodled or he drew on the ground. He's clearly writing something that could be read or that could be communicated. We don't know what it is. It would be fabulous if we had it, but we don't. But if we go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, in 16 through 21, that's the story where Jesus returns to his home synagogue in Nazareth. And there, in the middle of Sabbath services, he takes out the scroll of Isaiah, unrolls it, finds the place that he wants, and proceeds to read from the scroll of Isaiah, which means that Jesus knew how to read, therefore he probably knew how to write. And that way, he is able to communicate in biblical Hebrew, which is very important. So not only did he speak the vernacular of Aramaic, but he also was educated in how to read and write in biblical Hebrew. So this is the oldest form of Hebrew that we have, that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and certainly the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, would have been written in. And so we knew that he could read and he could write as a human being. But more than that, there's some really compelling things to pay attention to about God being able to write. And what's really struck me when I went back to answer this question is that Jesus is very clearly writing with his finger. And we get the same thing in Exodus chapter 31, verse 18. It says, 2 tablets of the covenant are written on stone by the finger of God. And so those 2 tablets that Moses brought down while he was up on Mount Sinai, God apparently wrote those with God's own finger. So God the Father knows how to write as well and writes in biblical Hebrew. It also speaks it so that that's how the people communicate with God and God communicates to the people. So we have God choosing to write with God's finger here and here. There's also some other interesting conversation about the finger of God in Exodus chapter 8, verse 19. During the plague of gnats, which is a particularly disgusting plague, it says the magicians declare to Pharaoh that it is the finger of God, that plague was a proof of the finger of God. Later on, in both Exodus chapter 29, verse 12, we see that the ordination of the priests includes the application of the bull blood, the bull that is slaughtered as part of the ordination process, to the horns of the altar with the finger. So there seems to be something very holy about using your finger and making marks with it, which of course we still do in the church when we make the sign of the cross. The last one was that in Leviticus chapter 14, verse 16, the purification of lepers is done with oil applied from the finger. So the priesthood would be cleansing people again with that finger, not making the sign of the cross, I default to that, but using it to apply as a way to convey holy power of healing and holy presence. So we see very clearly that God is engaged. We are literate people as Christians, so are our Judaic and Muslim siblings in the Abrahamic faith tradition. And it would not surprise us that Jesus could read and write. And so the other question is, well, did Jesus write anything? Well, no, we don't have anything. And my suspicion is that there were a group of people that were actually trained, educated, and expected to write. These were the scribes. They knew how to write, and they did write. They were in charge of copying the holy texts and the scrolls that Jesus would have read from, like the scroll of Isaiah. So there were people that were tasked with that, and the supplies to write were not easily found. And in fact, the first writings for the New Testament come long after Jesus. They come at the end of the first century. And so Jesus is already resurrected and ascended into heaven. It was not part of their tradition to write. The other interesting and compelling thing about did Jesus write anything is that if Jesus had written something, then people would probably pay more attention to that then telling of their experience and the things that Jesus said, the things that they were talking about. There is an experiential component to oral tradition, and it includes not just here's what I saw and here's what I heard and here's what we did, but this is how I felt about it, and this is what my experience was. It's more of a holistic understanding of a person experiencing the divinity of Jesus Christ. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we have in the multiple gospel accounts, is that it's conveying to us, in some cases, probably a very clear understanding from four central authors, but there are many stories that were shared from across the experiences with Jesus that are coalesced in those gospels, and that's truly a beautiful thing. And we're invited to have our own stories and to share those stories. And a lot of our testimonies that we still give today are oral testimonies rather than written ones. In fact, my sermons are oral testimonies, and so we still celebrate that tradition, although it is important to have read and write, especially to have access to the scriptures. So I hope that gives us a little insight into how long God has been taking time to write for us and with us. Thanks for the question.